There is a battle most trauma survivors fight every day, not with the world, but inside themselves. The war between shame and guilt. Again, welcome back to Unzipped Lips. I am your hostess, Mary Freshwater, and I'm excited to have you back here with me discussing shame and guilt, the silent war after trauma. This is not an easy subject. It's one that we don't talk a lot about after trauma and, you know, getting through to the next phase of your life. But I want to talk about this because my biggest question is which one has been louder in your life? The guilt of what happened or the shame of believing it defines you? Like, most people don't know that when you have gone through something horrific, whether it's abuse, a physical trauma, something that happened, you're a soldier and you're the one who came home and not your buddy, there is so much shame and guilt that you have to deal with after going through these experiences. And not enough people talk about this because, shame keeps us silent. It does. Guilt keeps us isolated. And these are very much hidden battles. And most people can't even define it because the hidden battle really comes down to guilt is about an action. Actions. I did something wrong or I didn't do this. Shame, though, shame is more about your identity, that you are what was wrong. And let's really dive into both of those because trauma confuses these lines, leaving survivors burdened with emotions that they should not have to be fighting through. People are victim shamed. It breaks my heart because these are struggles and burdens that you have to fight through, but no one wants to talk about. So let's first start off with talking about guilt because there's multiple roots to guilt. There's multiple forms of guilt. The one that most of us all know is that's labeled most common actually is survivor's guilt. Why me and not them? And the choices made by survival mode. I should have fought back, or I should have left sooner, or I should have known better. All of these come in to play because it's just like when you feel like you survived something that you shouldn't have and it should have been someone else. Our soldiers deal with this, our police deal with this, firefighters that lost one of their comrades. Like, survivor's guilt is real, and it is one that is most common and we most talk about. But there are so many other ones. One, responsibility guilt. Feeling like you caused or contributed to your trauma even when you didn't have anything to do with it. And honestly, this is most common when it is abuse that has happened as a child. When we're abused as a child, for some reason, we blame ourselves like we could have done something to not have gone through it. Or a victim of violence that says we should have fought harder. That's not how this works. But we fight with this guilt that we're somehow responsible for what has happened to us, even though it's not a choice that we had. How about the moral guilt? This is when it's connected to values, faith, or moral beliefs. Someone might feel guilty for surviving by making a choice that went against the normal belief within them. So now they feel betrayed. Like they betrayed themselves because they survived this by going against their moral beliefs. And that carries so much weight, especially when you're talking about someone who's in the church and you have spirituality is such a part of who you are, and you win against some of the basic core values that you had just to survive. There's also parental or protector guilt. Feeling guilty for not protecting others, such as your child, siblings, friends, or even a stranger. This is huge because when parents find out later in life that their child was molested by a coach and they didn't see it, that guilt eats a parent alive because you didn't protect your child. You fundamentally failed at your job, but yet you had no idea. Your child didn't tell you. So there's so much guilt with that, and you carry it. This is such a burden. I should have kept them safe. I should have had known. I should have known. This is huge also with parents, and my heart goes out to you if you are a parent who has a child who committed suicide. The guilt of not being there, in feeling like I should have known better. I should have been able to stop this. I'm so sorry, because that guilt, oof, I've watched my friend carry that one, and man, that's a heavy one. Adaptive guilt is another one. Productive. False responsibility. Your mind creates to try to make sense of this chaos that happened to you. Telling yourself it was my fault, to feel more in control of what happened because you were powerless. And you don't want to say that. This is a coping mechanism, this one, but it can be so toxic if it's not challenged, because this one will drag you down to the depths of hell if you don't stop saying that you were responsible for someone else's actions. Behavioral guilt is a huge one. Feeling guilty about how you coped with trauma. Blaming yourself for drinking, lashing out, and not healing fast enough. This is huge because people seem to think that there's a timeline for coping, that there is a timeline of healing. There is no timeline. And I am sorry, but behavioral guilt, yes, take responsibility for your actions, but don't carry guilt over it because you needed a moment to regroup and be able to cope and be able to find your way again. There is nothing wrong with that. But then you have comparative guilt. When you compare your trauma to someone else and feel you don't deserve to feel the pain that you've gone through because others had it worse. This leads to invalidating your own feelings. Your feelings are valid. What you went through is valid. What you have gone through is real, and you need to not compare it to someone else. And I say this all the time because when people talk to me about my story and they tell me, oh, my life wasn't nearly as bad. Guess what? Your life was just as bad for you as mine was for myself. And I don't want someone to compare their life to me because I don't want to compare my life to someone else. We all wear different sizes of shoes. We all have walked different paths. And we shouldn't carry any guilt for that. But there's also shame-based guilt. It's a crossover of both shame and guilt, where instead of just feeling guilty for what happened, you personally feel yourself feeling bad or dirty. This is especially common with abuse survivors. We feel so ashamed that it happened. We feel like we're not comfortable in our own skin. We can't clean it enough, especially after sexual trauma. I can't even tell you how many times after sexual trauma, when that happened, that I could not feel clean within a shower. I could not feel like I was a human, and I felt like I was so dirty. And I was a bad person because it happened. Guilt sometimes can be healthy, though, in pointing out our own behavior patterns, giving a chance for growth. But it is so toxic when we leave it unchallenged and tied to things outside of our control. Guilt is a hard thing to overcome, but you can overcome this. And then I want to talk about the poisons of shame. And there is so much overlap between the two. And it is a force in us that tears us apart if we don't start to challenge it, check it, and overcome it. Because shame is just a poison that hides, it festers, and it whispers you are nothing. You're not enough. This is what shame is. It ingrades into your identity and it doesn't let go. And it's so toxic. But it's also usually rooted from messages from an abuser or toxic environments. From family silence and denial, from our cultural stigma about trauma, mental health, and abuse. There's so much shame embedded in us that we can't talk about this. And unlike guilt, shame doesn't correct a behavior, but it corrodes our self-worth, it corrodes our self-esteem, and it just beats us with our own mind being the weapon. Again, there's multiple forms of shame in that that just lingers after trauma. Like I said, it overlaps a lot with guilt, but it cuts so much deeper into your identity. Like I said in the start, guilt says I did something wrong, while shame is saying you are what was wrong. So let's dive into the different types of shame. Because we have our core one, which is identity shame. It's the most prevalent form. It creates a belief that I'm not worthy, I'm broken, dirty, unlovable. As a survivor and someone who's gone through trauma, often internalizes this as the harm was proof of who you are, not just that this is something that happened to you. That this trauma, these things happened to you because you weren't of value. It's so not true. There's toxic shame. When shame becomes chronic and overwhelming, it shapes self-image, leads to self-hatred, perfectionism, people-pleasing, complete self-sabotage. Feeling like you must hide who you are because the real you is unacceptable. This is so painful because I see it in so many people that hide who they are because of this toxic shame that they are at the core, and who they are is not true. Body shame. This is common with people who've survived abuse, assault, or medical trauma. Feeling disgusted or hatred towards their body for being vulnerable, damaged, or a source of unwanted attention. It's often paired with struggles around intimacy, sexuality, or even basic self-care. And this is so common with rape, sexual assault. It's so damaging. Or medical trauma where your body has been altered. And it's so hard because this one is manifested both physically, emotionally, and mentally. Because you are physically dealing with what happened to you on top of the trauma of the emotional and mental capacity of what you've gone through. And you carry so much shame. And that's so hard. And just like we talked about survival guilt, there is survival shame too. Shame about how you survived the trauma. Example is feeling weak for freezing, complying, or not fighting back. That's the difference between the two. There's survival guilt, but there's survival shame. You have shame in how you reacted to what was happening to you to be able to survive. And this is shows up when you start saying, I should have done something different. I am cowardly or weak because I did this in the heat of the moment. But it is what it is. And it is okay to say that you did that. And there is no shame in it. You're here. You're alive. That is a blessing. And one of the hardest ones that I have to talk about all the time is social shame. Shame tied to how others might judge you if they knew your story. Fear of being seen too much, damaged, crazy, attention seeking, or the victim, being called a victim and being shamed for going through what you've gone through leads to silence, isolation. And this one's huge because when people victim shame you, that is a social shaming. To shame a victim for going through what they've gone through. And it's funny because I had gone through this after an abusive relationship. I had an employer that said I caused too much trauma. We worked at the same workplace. I'm the one left with bruises, fractured knuckles, but I was blamed for the drama because someone else decided to abuse me. All right. That doesn't make sense. But it happens all too often, whereas people want to blame a victim for causing drama. Can we have a heart? Have compassion. One of the hardest ones now is sexual shame. Often rooted, like I said, in sexual trauma, cultural conditioning. Survivors will feel dirty, broken, or unworthy of love. This can be passed down generational through cultural or religious beliefs about sex. But sexual shaming is so hard because as a woman, sexual shame comes in the fact that if you wear an outfit, you're being told that you asked for it. You're being shamed about who you were. If you're a gorgeous girl, like you have no control over your beauty. That is inherited. Let's be real. But if you're too pretty and a sexual assault happens, you're to blame because you were too sexual or you did something to provoke it. All right, let's let's take that one away, please. How about an imposed shame? This is usually passed down from in the family or community or even a culture. Being blamed for your abuse. You asked for it. Kind of ties back into that sexual shame because you asked for it. You're raised in a culture where trauma is silenced and survival is minimized. This is where we are standing today in our culture. Is we are being imposed that our trauma was done at our own hands. No. No. This shame isn't born in you. It's projected into you. And I can't even say enough about that because let's be real. Like, I should not have to feel shame because you believe something. I actually just had a conversation that unsolicited advice is the most selfish thing. And honestly, when people push shame into you because of something you went through and they have an opinion about that, that is the most selfish thing on their side. I'm sorry, but your opinion about my trauma does not matter and do not speak it. Keep it to yourself. I want to say that so loud that my trauma, you don't get to have an opinion on. Don't impose your shame onto me. And that is for everyone out there. Stop doing it. Please stop doing it, because all you're doing is perpetuating a culture that should not exist. And just like we have comparative guilt, we have comparative shame. You feel shamed because your trauma wasn't as bad. You can actually either have guilt or shame or a combination of both, because others have gone through more painful things, or you're feeling like you aren't worthy of healing because, you're not strong enough or whatever it is. No, you are worth more than that. So much more. Worth so much more than the shame and the guilt. And lastly, hidden shame. Shame that operates underneath the surface may show up with anger, control issues, perfectionism, avoidance rather than obvious self-blame. This is the hardest one out of all of them, because at the end of the day, a lot of our shame is hidden. Almost all of it is hidden. We don't publicly talk about the shame or the guilt that we're carrying because we made it through something that was meant to break us. We made it through something that was meant to drag us to the depths of hell and take us away from living. You made it through. You have so much more to go. And through all of this, trauma twists them together. These are so complex because guilt and shame isn't so individually as I just listed through a majority of all of them. They intertwine with each other. And trauma survivors often carry shame for what was done to them and guilt for how they responded. And I dealt with this so much. And so many people who have childhood abuse have so much shame and guilt of what had happened. Guilt that, they could have done more. We're looking at it from an adult mind of how a child behaved. And that's not how it works. This happened. An adult took advantage of a child. Adult was horrific to a defenseless human being. It's horrific to think about. But as we get older, we think about it and we carry guilt or shame on things that we may have done because of what we went through. And a lot of this keeps us stuck when we don't deal with it. We don't let go of the guilt and we don't release the shame. The biggest thing is recognizing the signs. Shame typically drives behaviors of isolation, perfectionism, hiding, fear, and fear of vulnerability. Like recognizing these signs and how guilt drives typically behaviors of over apologizing, replaying events, people pleasing, and really getting down to this can help us move forward. How do you recognize yourself in these patterns? Like, what patterns do you recognize? How do you see these showing up in your life? That is how you start to break cycles. Awareness breaks a cycle. Name the emotion. Is this guilt about what I did, or is it shame about who I am? Really diving into things can help you. Reframe guilt from punishment to responsibility. What can I learn or change after going through this? And I have said it so many times, there is purpose in the pain. It is diving in and looking at What can I take away from this? What positive things can I take from this? How can I build myself better? Because you have a better version of you waiting for you if you want to be intentional. Because you gotta release this. And when you release shame, you separate the trauma from your identity. When you reject the guilt and work through it, you get rid of the burden that you shouldn't be carrying. What happened to you is not who you are. It was not for you. So here's some tools. There is some somatic exercises. One of my favorite ones is placing a hand on your head and one on your heart, breathing slowly and repeating, I am safe and I am worthy, as you inhale light and push out the dark. And just breathe and sit in that, slowly breathing. I am safe. I am worthy. There's amazing journaling prompts you can get. You're welcome to talk with me or, Google some. Write one shameful thought or one guilt thought and then reframe it. Change it. Change what it says. Go from I am not worthy to I am worth the world. I'm responsible for what happened to me to I had no part in that, but I am better for it. Be positive with your experiences. Even if they are negative, there is positivity in it. Write out affirmations. I am not my past. I am not my trauma. I am who I choose to build. Write out your own affirmations that you actually believe in, that you can feel into the depths of your soul. And I encourage people, if you are overwhelmed with these shame and guilt and things of trauma, I encourage you to seek out therapy, coaching, or a trusted community. Again, I am a coach. I have a workbook that has been published that you can get, Build You After Trauma. Find resources because you don't need to live with this anymore. Shame has told you for too long that you are broken, and guilt has told you that you made a mistake. But healing tells you neither of those define you. If this episode has hit home for you, share it with someone who might be carrying the battle inside them in silence. Let's unzip the shame, unpack the guilt, and build freedom together. I thank you for chiming in and listening to this episode of Unzipped Lips. Thank you for unzipping with me. Don't forget to like, share, follow. And if you're wanting to talk to me more, please schedule a clarity call on my website, buildyou.us, or grab my book on Amazon, Build You After Trauma. I look forward to talking with you in the next episode.